Hey there, listener. Corey Andrew Powell here, and I'm excited to share that Motivational Mondays is now sponsored by BetterHelp. Feeling stressed or anxious? Well, BetterHelp brings you online therapy that's convenient and affordable. NSLS members get 50% off your first month of BetterHelp when you sign up at betterhelp.com/NSLS or click the link in the show notes. Start your journey to better mental health today. Hello, everyone. I am Corey Andrew Powell. Welcome to Motivational Mondays, presented by the NSLS, now positively impacting over 2 million members nationwide. And as always, our mission is to bring you inspiring stories and transformative conversations to fuel your week and your life. Today is no exception. We are joined by two terrific gentlemen, Rashad Bilal and Troy Millings, founders of the revolutionary platform Earn Your Leisure and authors of the groundbreaking new book, You Deserve to Be Rich. And through their work, Rashad and Troy are redefining financial literacy for Black and Brown communities, breaking down barriers and empowering individuals to take control of their financial futures. Gentlemen, welcome to Motivational Mondays.
Thank you for having us. Pleasure to be here.
Appreciate it.
Yes. Well, it's my pleasure to have you as well here. And as I chatted with you a little off camera before we started, this is a very something that's a conversation that's very, very passion fueled for me, because I was a young man once who just did not understand some basic principles and got into serious credit card debt before I was even like 21 years old. And it came from just basic knowledge of not knowing some very simple things that you really lay out in your book. But just to get started, I will talk about your book. You know, the book opens with a bold statement about the American dream. And I would love to know if you want to elaborate a little bit on what you mean by that American dream being a quote unquote lie.
Yeah, I mean, for many of us, your story it relates, right? And we've all been through that at some point or another, whether it's from credit card debt, whether it's car loans, whether it's, student loans, whether it's mortgages or rent. We've all had some financial trauma that we've experienced. But we've been told that the dream is to get the house with the picket fence and live happily ever after. And for many of us, that's not our realities, because our starting points are a lot different. I mean, all of us, our starting points are really much different. And nobody's really provided the tools to actually attain those quote unquote dreams, right? Everybody shouldn't be dreaming the same dream, because, those dreams are going to be deferred. So the reality is we need to have resources, we need to have tools, we need to have mentors, we need to have models to show us how to get to that quote unquote dream so that we can manifest it into reality. So we wanted to start the book like that because the statement is so true, right? We've obviously lived long enough to see some of those realities, and we've overcome some of the traumas that we faced throughout our adulthood and some of our childhood to get to the point where it's like, hey, we've seen it. Let's give everybody the education around it so they can make better choices in the future.
Excellent. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that sums it up, as far as the reality that most people have versus what they thought that it would be is completely different. And I think that is because there's a lack of financial understanding, financial education on what financial freedom actually is, and what, the American dream was built on is something that is more of an illusion when you really start to understand things as opposed to a reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's exactly it. I mean, the fact that we start at different points in our lives than many of our counterparts who are not African American or people of color is something that is often sort of dismissed, but it's a really big part of the equation when there's like systemic disparities between all these groups and how some have had the ability to get ahead more than others. Now, before we continue, as I mentioned also before we started, that I have construction going on outside my window, but gentlemen, luckily you're being recorded on your own independent feeds, so it will be probably not at all on your side on the audio, but you may hear it on mine. So just, ignore it.
No, that makes it a real New York story. So let's keep it going.
Yeah, exactly. It might be like at some point, like a wrecking ball may come through the window.
I'm waiting for the fire truck to pass.
Yeah, that's next. Sirens, we're New Yorkers, right? So we know. But no, I love the fact that you're breaking it down, because so often we hear about the privilege word and many people are offended by that, but we're not actually saying that someone's necessarily willingly taken advantage of it, but we're just saying that societally, there's certain people who have, obviously gotten farther ahead than others because of their physical appearance and ethnicity. Now, you've mentioned how financial systems have historically worked against Black and brown communities. So what are some of the key systemic barriers that you guys hope to dismantle through your work?
Well, I think the first one is the education system within itself, right? That's something that we've actually been working on as far as creating curriculum and working with different school districts and principals, because I think that's where it starts. I mean, we could talk about the banking system. We can talk about, corporate America. We can talk about so many things when it comes to venture capital, private equity. There's a variety of different things that need to be fixed. But one of the key components to the wealth gap is the miseducation of poor and middle class people. So if you're not taught about money, then you're going to make the same mistakes that your parents make. And little things like, just a couple of $1,000s of credit card debt when you're in college can set you back years. Not even understanding student loans can set you back for 20 years, right? Like you might have picked a state school as opposed to going out of state school if you actually were educated on the effects, the long-term effects of taking out $100,000 of student loan and then getting a sociology degree. So really, at the core root, I think a lot of things can be avoided if we have understanding. Like if we understand the power of compounding interest and we start to save early, if we start to really invest in our 401k as soon as we get the job, as opposed to figuring it out when we're 40. This is stuff that's vitally important. Learning about life insurance, learning, these are things that it doesn't take structural change. Like, as far as, like I said, the private equity and venture capital and banking system, that's structural change. That's a lot harder. But this is change that happens on the individual level. And a lot of it is just mindset and understanding, really. So that to me is something that's easier to reach people where they're at, especially young people. If we can start to change the way that people look at money, change the way that people have their feelings about, emotional intelligence when it comes to finance, I think that can go a long way.
Yeah, I agree. And to add to it, it's, that's why part of the title is Mastering the Inner Game of Wealth, right? So we've had the privilege over the past 6 years to sit down with millionaires. We've had the privilege to sit down with thousandaires. We had the pleasure to sitting down with startup companies and entrepreneurs who are trying to get off the ground. And we've been able to decipher what everyone's doing at each level. And especially at the highest level, we're talking about billionaires. There's a certain way that they go about practicing wealth. There's certain habits that they have. And so, we felt the obligation to give that information back to the common folk, because if the goal is to make sure that everybody deserves to be rich, we actually have to give you the blueprint. And it's true, the education is the most vital piece, right? Like even in the book, when we talk about understanding how real estate works, I tell the story about my family not knowing what a fixed rate versus an adjustable rate mortgage is, right? We had the house with the picket fence. We lost it because we had an adjustable rate mortgage. My parents are immigrants. They had no idea. That could have changed the financial trajectory of my family for years. I actually still live in the same neighborhood where that house is. And so when I drive past it, it's a flashback of what could have been. That house is probably has a valuation of over $1.4 million. When they bought it in 1988, it was $165,000. So think about the equity that's grown over that time. And obviously just the education, something as simple as understanding the principles of how to approach a mortgage, that could have changed my generation. It could have changed the next generation, but we didn't have the education. And so now that we have it and we understand it, it's time to give it to the people so that they can execute it and not make the same mistakes.
Wow. I mean, that story gives me goosebumps too, because before I logged on to join you gentlemen in this call, I was on the phone with my mother and I was talking to her about, I was anticipating the conversation. And I was like, Mom, these two guys, they did this great thing. They're doing this great thing, talking and making sure that we people in our community have these conversations. And she said, well, make sure you let them know that I almost killed you for that credit card. You used $5,000 a day, because I didn't know what an APR was. I mean, your parents give you a credit card and they say, don't run it up. But the conversation was very lacking. Why don't run it up? What is a principal versus the interest rate? Like I literally was like 29 years old when I found out really why my credit card debt wasn't going down, because I just didn't have a simple idea of what APR meant and principal versus interest. And to your point, that simple conversation could have changed everything if only my mom had that with me, and it just
Yeah.
didn't happen. So I just love that you're changing that. And is that when you talk about applied knowledge as well? I mean, in the book you mentioned applied knowledge as being something that can also transform. So what do you mean by applied knowledge?
Yeah, your scenario is the actual inverse of mine. So early on, my mom made me an authorized user on her American Express, not knowing, I didn't even know what the APR, same way that you didn't know, I didn't know, because every time I used the credit card, she told me I had to pay it in full.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew at the end of the month, whatever I was using, I had to pay for it. So that system got me in that applied knowledge was like, hey, there is no minimum payment. The minimum payment is the amount that you actually spend. The other piece of that education was knowing that I was a authorized user. I got the luxury of having her credit experience. And so I was born in 82, but the credit card she opened was 1985. So as soon as I had the card as a authorized user, I had 14 to 15 years of credit card history.
Nice.
Automatically boosts my credit score. So the next time that I get a credit card, they're going to take the average of the 15 years plus the one that I'm just opening. They'll say, wait, he has 8 years of history at 18 years old, which gives me an advantage, right? I get a higher amount. I get a better credit score, which allows me to get better things, better interest rates when it comes to anything like a car, or even at that time when I was trying to get computers, because at that time I couldn't afford anything. You had to make payments on it. Those lessons were applied just because of the information that was given to me, not even consciously, but subconsciously.
Yeah. Well, that's why for me as a younger person, American Express was like, it made no sense to me. I'm like, if I can't even afford a partial payment on this every month, there's no way I can afford to pay it off in full. So I knew better than to fool with Amex until recent years, I'll just when things were a little different, but that made no sense to me as a concept. That's the whole point of credit cards, I thought. But you're right. I mean, that's a great lesson. And that is an example of when you have that knowledge early on, how it changes your perspective, because that means you were programmed to know I can't, or I won't, or shouldn't buy this thing if I know I can't pay for it and pay it off in 30 days. I mean, did it actually program you to think that way?
Yeah, it actually helped. That doesn't mean that I still didn't get another credit card and make minimum payments. It was just that I knew on the other end, oh, okay, that is actually an option. Like you can make a $20 payment when you use $100 of the credit. And so you learn that system. But over the long term, it's like, all right, you still have that discipline to know that this has to be paid off on time.
Yeah.
You use it, you have to pay it. Yeah, so that system always stays with you. And at that time when you're young, like your mom's getting the bill. And so she knows what you're charging.
Yeah.
So rather than hear her voice every 16th of the month, it was like, all right, I better make sure I pay this on the 14th.
Yeah.
So you're also paying ahead of time.
Right. And saving yourself a lot of that, sparing the rod, as they say. One part, well, there's so much in the book that I love, but one thing that really it resonates with me more than I think it just jumps out. I kept thinking about it was when you talk about your most valuable commodity being like time. The idea that is what you have to really assess as being one of the most valuable things that you have that correlates to your financial wealth and financial health. So what is it about time in regards to our financial wealth that makes you deem it as one of our most valuable commodities?
Yeah, I mean, it's the only thing that you really can't get back, right? Like you can get back money, you could lose money, then get it back. You can lose a relationship and you can get it back. You can lose a house and you can get it back. But you can't, once you lose time, you can't get it back. So, having time is something that's extremely valuable. And, the whole point of financial freedom is not just to have a bunch of money, it's to have time, right? So you can buy back your time. And now you can actually go to your children's soccer game. You can actually take a vacation when you want. You can actually, go to lunch at 3:00 instead of 12:00 because you don't have to worry about getting back at 1:00, right? Like little things like that. You can wake up when you want to wake up, right? You can go to bed when you want to go to bed. So can't do that if you're not in a position of financial freedom. So the time aspect, I think, is important to keep it in perspective for people because, like I said, sometimes people just look at it as like, well, I'm not really into material items and I don't need a bunch of money to sustain my lifestyle. But when they look at it from a time standpoint, it's like, okay, well, how valuable is it to make sure that you go to every one of your children's games, right? How valuable is it to make sure that, you can travel for a week every month as opposed to a week every year, right? Like that starts to put things in perspective. Like, what would the mental health be if you actually were able to sleep in as opposed to waking up at 5:30 because you had no other option. You had to get to work by 7. So, things like that, I think makes it a little bit more attainable as far as the average person looking at it.
Yeah. Again, amazing advice. And I know that you said something where, earlier, I think in the conversation, it was said that, you guys spent time, around billionaires, you spent time around millionaires and thousandaires. And I do think that also looking at what people who are financially successful have done, that is how you learn sort of like what are their tactics, what are their tricks, and what is just their everyday way of managing their money. One thing I see is that people who are new to money, and you guys probably have seen this too, people who are new to money are very often the ones who are flashy, spending excessively, while people who really are thinking about their financial health for long-term gain are the ones who are being much more frugal. But what is that balance between living, and saving and not really enjoying life, right? There's like this balance. People save, then they die tomorrow and never even got to enjoy the money. So, I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a balance, it's that's why our slogan is assets over liabilities, not just assets and no liabilities. So, you have to enjoy life because you only get one shot at it. So we would never encourage somebody just to be an extremist. I think, being extreme in anything is detrimental to you, right? So life is about balance. So you want to have fun. It's okay to go shopping. It's okay to have nice things. It's okay to have a nice car if you want. But the problem is when you are doing it in excess and you're doing it without the foundation, which is investing in savings, right? When you have more liabilities and assets, that's the problem. So when you get paid and your first priority is to go clubbing, your first priority is to go shopping, your first priority is to look good as opposed to actually, put some money into the stock market, have real estate, make sure your bills are paid, make sure your children have that's a problem. So we just want to reverse the mindset that a lot of people have. And most of the time, if they would pay their bills first, spend money second, and save third. Like if there's anything left over, then they'll put money in savings, and that's not a recipe for success. You want to make sure you pay yourself first. That's important. You have to treat your savings, your investing like a bill. You don't have the option of missing your cell phone bill because your cell phone is so vitally important to your life that no matter what happens, you're gonna find a way to pay your cell phone bill. You have to treat your retirement, you have to treat your investments, you have to treat your savings the same way.
That's funny because my next question, and you sort of laid out 3 things right there. So I want to break that down a little bit. My next question was actually going to be how people can usually find trying to get their financial world together. It can be very daunting. Financial literacy can be very daunting and overwhelming. So I was going to ask you, what are 3 practical steps that someone can take today to begin their journey towards more financial health, if you will, better financial health? So you just said something right there, about paying yourself. So say that again. Of like, what would be the steps of when you get your paycheck? What is the best way to utilize it for financial health?
I think you have to create a budget. That's important, right? So you have to be disciplined. You got to know how much money is coming in, how much money is going out. Look at everything, a line item, just like a business would, right? Create a budget. Then from that budget, you have to carve out money allocated towards saving, towards investing. So then that goes to so the first thing is budget. The second thing is actually investing and saving. So this is what we call dollar cost averaging, where you have a disciplined approach to say, okay, I know that I have an excess of $1,000 a month. So I can reasonably put away $300 to $500 every single month into my investment account, right? So every single month that comes out on the 15th or whatever date you pick, so that's a easy way to begin investing, a disciplined approach. You don't have to start with 10,000, 100,000, $1 million. You can start with a couple $100. You can put it into an index fund. You could just start that routine. Life is about routine. So you want to just create good habits. So like I said, you definitely put together a budget. Then you look at investing. And then over and above that, I think that you have to have an idea of where you want to go in the future, right? So having accountability partners, I think, is extremely important, and creating goals. So when you create a goal, you want to make sure that you're holding yourself accountable, but it's better when somebody else holds you accountable as well. So if you can create accountability groups and you can break the goal into, weekly goals or monthly goals as opposed to a yearly goal or just a goal with no, like, I just want to make $1 million. That's my goal.
Right.
That's not really a goal. That's a wish.
Right.
Like, so you have to kind of work your way into it. So if you create the budget, you start to save, you have a goal. I think that, those are some steps that you can take to really achieve your financial goals.
Yeah. And would you say it's never too late to really, excuse me, it's never too late to sort of get your financial house in order? I mean, for me, I was about 28, 29 when I got it together, and I had to literally, all real talk. I had to go to consumer credit counseling. I had to lay it all on the table and go, I don't know what I did here, but I'm almost 30 and I screwed up somewhere when I was like 19, and I'm still, I got to stop that cycle. So, luckily in my case, I felt like I still had time. But I mean, is there always time to get it together financially if you haven't in the past?
Yeah, I think 100%. There's always a time. I think it's never too early, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than saying it's never too late, I think it's never too early. You have conversations with teenagers and they'll say, "Oh, I got time, I got time." Then they turn into college students and, "Oh, I got time, I got time." And then life happens and it's like, "I got time." No, you want to make sure that people have a foundation of financial education early on, which is why it's important that we start in schools and hopefully they grasp the information and they'll carry on throughout their life. But same thing for adults, right? Financial maturity really doesn't have an age, right? There are plenty of people who are in their 60s who have come to, the things that we put together and say, I didn't know that. I wish I had known earlier. And so it's never too late and it's never too early. The information is the most important thing. That's why the educational piece, what we said earlier, is that foundation, because the more you know, the better decisions you're going to make, not only for yourself, but your family. So when we talk about financial education, financial fluency, that leads to being rich, right? For one person or maybe a group of people, which leads to financial wealth, which leads to generational and sustainable wealth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And especially when we say generational wealth, we see when it comes to real estate a lot that people of color, specifically African Americans, just because of a whole lot of systemic issues in America in general, we really did not benefit from generational wealth at all when it comes to real estate in many cases. So I think that's really important, the story you shared, because people who are going to become homeowners, they need to understand the legacy also behind things in America when it comes to housing. And so we can avoid sort of repeating history again and what happened in your case, which is really, really important. And when you mentioned the earn your leisure community, earn your leisure, that concept as well, what is meant by earn your leisure? Does that mean making all the right financial choices, like consciously, as we just discussed?
When we get asked that question, I'm always interested in hearing the perspective of the people who are interpreting it. So it means a lot to different people. I think when we were coming up with the idea, it was more about earning the freedom, right? Like we come from a working class environment where, people looked at us and thought we were silver spoon kids. We never had any issues. We went to private school and we got the finest education, not knowing that, we had to work for everything we did, work 2 jobs, go to school on the weekends, go to school at night, just to get some of the freedoms and luxuries that people perceived that we had. And so every step, every brick by brick was earned, right? And there was a process and we never skipped a step. Even, when we started this media company, it was 2 iPhones and an idea. Right. So to watch us where we've grown, like people have been through that entire journey, and they realize that everything we've done has been earned, and there's been mistakes that have been had, but that's the beautiful part of the struggle, right? The mistakes that we make gives the next generation or the next group of people the step up that, we watched them do it. We don't have to follow that path. And so earn your leisure has always been earning your freedom, but earning the luxuries that come with that freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of those things for people to realize too is like you can change things by just making the efforts. I mean, I know, like, for example, the idea of being like sort of stuck in someone's cubicle until I turned 70 was just never going to work for me. You know what I mean? Like, but that's normal for most generations, right? That's what our parents did in many cases. But there's a point where I was like, so I need to figure out some alternatives and what it will take for me to have a very different existence. And financially as well. What does that look like? And so I think many people get stuck, don't realize that you can get unstuck. And I think there's another component to this financial thing where people might feel so overwhelmed that they just don't know how to get out of that situation. So I'm glad you're indicating that, it's never too late for people to kind of undo the past in that regard.
Yeah, I think the awareness is the first part, right? So when we talk about how do you get out, well, let's first create the plan. Let's see where the money's coming from. Like, let's see where it's going out to. But how do we create multiple streams of income? I think that's the part that most people get stuck on. They'll look at their age and say, all right, well, I got 24 years until I can retire. Well, it's a mindset shift, right? Is it retirement at age, or is it the amount of money that you need to get to? If it's the amount of money, let's figure out how we get there. And the best way to do it is to create multiple streams. And so if I'm working, yes, I have a salary, but how can I create more streams that come in that go into addition to that salary that I can now save and now I can invest, whether it's in the market, whether it's in real estate, whether it's in myself or another business. So I got to have more money coming in to get to that number rather than saying, all right, 65, I'm going to collect retirement, or 67, or who knows, at some of these, this next generation, they may look and say, wait, Social Security and retirement, it doesn't look the same as when my parents had it. So, the plan is the most important, but how do we create around that plan?
Yeah. Yeah. I think what I would encourage, especially our younger listeners, to keep in mind is that long-term goal when it comes to retirement. You brought up something earlier about, being young, 19, 20 years old. You're not thinking about that. I didn't think about that. And I was only thinking about going to the club. I mean, I was in New York City. Come on. That was what my life was like, the club, and would go like to work from the club. Like that was pretty much what we did in the 90s. And all of a sudden, I was like, how's that looking when I'm 70? What's that like when the club ain't not an option anymore for viability for activities or whatever? And it made me think about what my life would look like later. And that is something that if you really are focused on financial health, I think that's a starting point to consider the future. But it's hard for young people to do that because when we're living in our young selves, we don't really project that far ahead. But I do think that is one of the markers I think that most people independently might look at and go, yeah, maybe I better get it together before retirement. But enough of us don't do it. I don't know why we don't do it.
I think it's changing. I mean, when you look at this generation, especially in the world of social media, you're watching younger and younger people create careers for themselves, right? You look at the Castanets, who's 23 years old. You look at Speed, who just turned 20 last week, right? These guys are self-made from same neighborhoods that a lot of us come from, that have created something for themselves. Everybody's not going to be able to do that, but there's businesses inside that, right? Somebody has to be the cameraman. Somebody has to be the engineer.
Oh, right.
There's businesses and economies that are being built by these people with nothing but the technology that they have in their hand. And so it gives people an alternative and a way to say, all right, this isn't something that I have to wait till I'm 30 to do, right? Like these guys are millionaires before they hit 25. Right. And they didn't have to dance and they didn't have to, rap, and they didn't have to play sports, right? They use their personality and their IP to create something that can be replicable for plenty of generations. So, I mean, the more we see young people getting to a place of financial freedom, the better it is for all generations.
Gentlemen, I have one final question for you today. And this is again, thank you for all this wonderful information. And I want to just now ask you sort of what's next for the Earn Your Leisure community and your mission to educate. Like, how can listeners support your vision and get more information to help themselves?
Yeah, for sure. Well, we have a book that's out right now. You Deserve to Be Rich, New York Times bestseller. So that's something that I think is a great starting point for anybody that's interested in personal finance, investing, entrepreneurship, kind of walks you through the whole entire journey from A to Z. So definitely would encourage people to actually get that, read it. And as far as our platform, we create content all the time. So we have 3 shows: Earn Your Leisure, show called Blackout, show called Market Mondays. And we talk about stocks. We talk about real estate. We interview entrepreneurs. We have opinions about different things. So, all the information is on our YouTube channel, Earn Your Leisure. Social medias, Earn Your Leisure across all social media platforms. You can, get a taste of what we have and really just, dive in if you're interested in learning.
That's excellent. Well, we will make sure that everyone knows that and has all that information. I know I will be subscribing and following as well, because I ain't going back in the debt ever. Okay. So I'm just going to put that out there. So you guys, thank you so much for what you do. It's wonderful. It's, like I said, a passion for me to make sure that young Black people especially, but everyone, the beauty of what you're doing is this is not just only information that we will benefit from. It's really anybody who wants to have financial freedom and knowledge. But of course, your target audience is people who look a little bit like us. So that's also awesome, a bonus. So Rashad Bilal and Troy Millings, thank you so much, authors of the new book, You Deserve to Be Rich. And thank you for being here today with me on Motivational Mondays.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.